Welcome into the 50th episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always, and I hope your Monday is getting off to a great start. I'm happy to be here with you at the beginning of another week, and I'm happy that this is episode number 50. I cannot believe that we are at kind of a, milestone number, if you will. I mean, we started this new show with Hoosier Illustrated back nearly, 4 months ago at this point. Not exactly to the date, but I mean, that's a third of a year since we've been doing these shows 3 times a week. And, it's flown by. It's been fun. And I remember whenever we first started, or first knew that we were going to do this with Hoosier Illustrated, that, the big hype going into all of this was whether or not Indiana football was going to be able to lead us into a good start, to the collegiate athletic season. And Indiana football, of course, up until this season has kind of been a laughing stock, give or take a couple of off years, outlier seasons, if you will, but none more different than what we've seen this season, of course. And so there was always this thought in the back of my mind, well, like, wow, if Indiana football ends up not living up to any of this hype and maybe they're just as average, if not awful, as they've always been, then this will just be a slog getting ready for college basketball season. Well, now I find myself in the exact opposite situation. It's almost hard to talk college basketball because not only, as I mentioned earlier, is Indiana doing something that we never really pictured realistically, but it's bled like they're because they're a contender with the college football playoff and the Big Ten championship and all of that good stuff. We're learning to do double duty, right? And I guess this is the long-winded way in me saying welcome into the 50th episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Glad to have you along for the ride. And if you're brand new, welcome in and glad to have you on board. Join us for the next 50 episodes, 100 episodes, however many episodes this thing goes on for. Hopefully it's many, many more to come because I have enjoyed what we have done so far with this. Man, where do we start today? A lot of stuff to react to from over the weekend. We've got Cignetti's new contract extension. It's an extension, but it's also a completely reworked contract that basically gives him an 8-year, a restructuring, if you will. Yeah. So from this point forward, Indiana football will be paying Curt Cignetti enough money to make him the 10th highest paid head coach in college football, at least, unless things change with other head coaches between now and then. But Indiana football is committed to this success, as you would expect them to be. This new deal, of course, 8 years, will take them all the way to 2032. Cignetti will receive an average annual compensation of $8 million per season, and he will also receive an annual $1 million retention bonus. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of, all of the intricate details of the contract, but long story short with all of this is that Indiana is going to be able to retain somebody who, and myself included, I was in this bandwagon, if you will, for a long time. I thought it was going to be very difficult to keep Cignetti around for longer than a year based on the level of success that he was having with the Hoosiers this season. But now that really all of this kind of became reality more so, at least for me, after Florida decided they were no longer going to, and I say no longer as if they had made a decision, they had came out and said that they were not going to move on from Billy Napier. And I don't know if that was enough for Cignetti to, maybe he was never flirting with it. And of course, I'll play the sound here in a second. Of course, another epic quote from Curt Cignetti as he was interviewed by Rob Stone on Big Noon Kickoff. And the soundbite that he gave us, of course, was very on brand. And I guess we'll go and let that play right now. This is what Cignetti said to Rob Stone on Big Noon Kickoff whenever asked about his new deal and, why he decided it was important for him to stay in Indiana?
They came to me. They were very proactive. And, some people say, well, why would you do that when, this one may open, that one may open, and you're going to be a hot commodity and blah, blah, blah. And the fact of the matter is, we're the emerging superpower in college football. Why would I leave?
We're the emerging superpower in college football. Again, yet another phrase to come out of one Curt Cignetti's mouth that I'm sure will be quoted time and again, whether it be for good reason or bad reason, especially when you think about the game coming up this weekend against Ohio State. Both that phrase can be used both positively and negatively against you when you think about what was said. Because if Indiana goes into Columbus and gets completely lambasted and it's not a close game at all and the Buckeyes look like a typical Ohio State team, then people will use that quote against them and say, oh, emerging superpower. Let's see you beat one of the elites sometime in the future. Better luck next time. Or if he goes into the shoe and beats Ohio State, people will start to roll with the idea like, oh my gosh, is this really about to take place? Is Curt Cignetti going to make Indiana a not traditional power, but a new blood, if you will? And that's jumping a little too far ahead of things whenever I use that phrase new blood, because of course Indiana hasn't done anything yet. They haven't won a conference title. They haven't won a national championship, and neither one of those things may never happen, right? So calling Indiana a new blood, that's a bit premature. I can admit that. But to call them an emerging superpower and going with the phrasing that Cignetti used right there, I mean, again, right now we have no reason to think that can't be the case, potentially, right? So we'll see. And I know a lot of people, myself included, are extremely excited. Not really. Here's one thing. I'm not as nervous, at least right now. I'm not as nervous about the Ohio State game as I anticipated being. And let me explain why that is. And it's not necessarily because I think Indiana's going to go in and steamroll Ohio State. That's certainly not the case. Do I think Indiana has the capability to beat Ohio State? Absolutely. There's no reason that they cannot do so, especially when you look at comparable results between teams that they've played against, most notably the Nebraska game. And again, maybe those were anomaly performances by both teams, but I don't think there's any reason to think that Indiana can't beat Ohio State. And what's crazy, though, is that a lot of national pundits, and I say it's crazy, like it's not really that crazy, because they don't pay attention to Indiana football the way that those in the Big Ten do, and that, people like us who follow Indiana regularly do. It's not crazy for them to doubt Indiana whenever they probably don't. Like they've probably looked at that Nebraska game when it happened and then completely forgot about it. And then they just go back to thinking the strength of schedule is just, oh, this is why Indiana's good. It's all about the strength of schedule, because apparently strength of schedule only matters if you're in the SEC, right? So it's very annoying. I'm ready for that nonsense to be put to bed, because it's going to be continue to be held against Indiana if they don't, at the very least, play competitively against Ohio State. And let me get back to what my original thought was. I want to talk about why I'm not as nervous about the result either way when it comes to what may happen between Indiana and Ohio State on Saturday. And we'll bring in Mitchell Paige here in a few minutes, and he may give you a different reaction to this, and I didn't mention this to him during our conversation last night when we pre-recorded it, but he's definitely more along the lines of Indiana may need to actually win this game to get in the playoff. And let me tell you why I disagree with that now. I went back and looked at all of the final college football playoff rankings from each of the previous iterations. So there's 10 of them, right? From 2014 to 2023. And I know things have changed in college football. Doing a preface with that too. There was no super conferences. There was more teams that were G5 teams that are now in the, like the Big 12 and that type of stuff, a lot has changed. I understand that part of it. But you can't deny the fact that I'm about ready to present, and that in the 10 years of the 12 team, or excuse me, of the college football playoff rankings, even though there were only 4 teams that made the college football playoff, there has never been a power conference team that has been left out of the top 12 that had 1 loss or less. I hope I articulated that correctly. I'll say it again to make sure that I hopefully said it correctly. There's never been a team left out of the top 12 that had a loss or less. And of course, the reason I bring that up is because many people are saying that Indiana has to, at the very least, and I've been saying this really until now, that Indiana has to lose close at the very least to get into the college football playoff. And I'm going to go ahead and stand on, I don't think they have to play close. Now, I don't think Indiana will get blown out. Like there's no scenario that Indiana loses this game, I think, by a score of like 49-10. I just don't think that is in any way, shape, or form a part of the DNA of this Indiana football team. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. I do think there is a chance, like if Indiana just has an off game, I can see a score playing out maybe like 31-14 Ohio State, something like that. And that wouldn't be considered. I mean, you right now, I believe you're 10.5-point dogs. I don't know if that's moved since I last looked at it. But if that were to be the case and you lose 31-14, then you end up you lost by 17. You end up not covering, and it's a touchdown difference. Or is it a touchdown? No, a touchdown difference from the spread. But I think it's going to be very hard to leave any 1-loss team out of the top 12. I don't care if it's Indiana. I don't care what Power 4 team it could be. I'm convinced that Indiana can lose this weekend and still get in the top 12. Maybe I'm proven wrong. And I hope we don't even have to go down that path, because the alternative in the complete opposite direction is that Indiana wins and immediately jumps up to being the number 2 team, more than likely, in the college football playoff rankings. And at that point, you have to finish your season with one of the worst Purdue teams we've seen in quite some time. And then you have the chance to go up against, again, we've talked about this before, the battle for the number 1 seed, as long as Oregon doesn't slip up. They almost did this past weekend against Wisconsin. And if you get to that point, you're playing in the Big Ten championship, 2 unbeatens, 12-0 versus 12-0. I mean, the winner gets the 1 seed and the loser gets the number 5, which again, even though that's 4 spots different than being the number 1, that's the most favorable seed you can get because of the auto buys. So we'll leave the rest of the football talk between myself and Mitchell, and we'll get to that here shortly. But I do want to get into a couple of other things before we move into that segment. I don't want to just do football talk today, because we are getting into we're getting into the thick of basketball season, right? Indiana faced South Carolina over the weekend and came away with a fairly convincing victory. And maybe that's not giving them enough credit, because this, without a doubt, was Indiana basketball's most impressive game of the 3 regular season games they've played so far. You got really good performances from Miles Rice, Kanan Carlisle. Really, the entirety of your backcourt played really well, especially when the talk coming into this game and really dating back to the offseason was, is Indiana going to have a formidable backcourt? Is everything going to mesh the way that Mike Woodson hopes it will? And this was the first time that we really saw something like that happen, especially with the 2 important new guys that are in your starting rotation with the 2 that I just mentioned, Carlisle and Rice. Both of them had phenomenal games. One of them in particular, Carlisle, was kind of capped off with one of the most ridiculous, unintentional 3-pointers that I've ever seen, where from about 30 feet out, Kanan Carlisle was attempting to lob the ball up to, I'm assuming Umar Ballo or Malik Renew. I don't remember who was down low at the time. But the lob was so misplaced that not only did it, not go where it was intended to go, it just went straight in the basket. So whenever you're having a day like that, things are rolling for you. So a little coffee sip break, but Indiana basketball gets the fairly dominant victory against the Gamecocks. They did let them stick around a little bit longer than many, myself included, would have liked to see. I think Indiana could have put them away a little sooner, but there were moments where that 7.5 point spread was in jeopardy. I think they got it as low as 8 during the second half, if I'm not mistaken, but Indiana was able to pull away. And I don't have the exact score in front of me right now, but I believe the final score is 87-71. So Indiana did take care of business. And they got one more tune-up game before they head down to the Bahamas in the Battle for Atlantis tournament, where they will face the Louisville Cardinals the day before Thanksgiving, and then move on to face a myriad of other potential teams depending on the initial result. And of course, best case scenario when you're thinking about your strength of schedule, if you're Indiana basketball, is of course beating Louisville and then facing off against what appears to be a really good Gonzaga team who already has a marquee victory over Baylor earlier on this season. And Indiana will get a really good chance to show how they may fare against elite level competition pretty early this season if they're able to take care of business against the Cardinals. And I say that now after I've seen Louisville play a couple of games, particularly their game against Tennessee at home, where they really underperformed in a game where I thought they may upset the Volunteers. And of course, I was basing all of that off of what I saw between Indiana and Tennessee in the charity exhibition. And of course, Tennessee goes into the KFC Yum Center and completely picks apart Louisville. And Louisville didn't have much of a response for what Tennessee was doing to them. So, and I think Indiana, when we get to that game, I think that's going to be a big game for Umar Ballo if he doesn't have one before then. Because Louisville doesn't have much of a big man presence. And if Mike Woodson prepares this team to exploit their weaknesses, especially when it comes to the way Indiana likes to run their offense, I think Umar Ballo is going to get fed and fed and fed and fed. And that will eventually open up, the 3-point shot as well, because they're going to need to defend Umar Ballo, whether they're able to or not. So I'm looking forward to that. Going to get a taste of if Indiana's ready for the next level of, college hoops. Can they prove on a national scale that they belong in the conversation to be with the best teams, not only in the Big Ten, but in college basketball this season. So very exciting. I really hope we get to enjoy a combo of a really good football season and a really good basketball season, because I don't know that we've ever gotten that, at least in my lifetime, of course, in my short 27 years of living. I don't remember the last time we've had a season where both are in good shape, because the 2 years where Tom Allen had some things rolling, that was the heart of the Archie Miller era, which was horrendous, of course. So we'll talk more basketball as the Indiana faces UNC Greensboro in their final tune-up game later this week. We'll chat with Alec on Wednesday, likely about not only football, but we'll get his thoughts on what Indiana needs to do to kind of make sure things stay on the right track as they inch toward their big Bahamas tournament next week on Thanksgiving. Also, I want to go back to football for a second before I forget this. Couple of important recruiting notes to keep an eye on. Byron Baldwin, who was previously committed to Indiana earlier this offseason, he decommitted, but then now has recommitted to Indiana and Curt Cignetti. Don't really know what that's all about, but hey, the players have all the power, and if they want to explore their options and decide to come back to where they initially wanted to go, they have the ability to do that. So Byron Baldwin, the 4-star safety out of Baltimore, Maryland, now back a part of the Indiana football recruiting class for 2025. And also of note, Julian Lewis, who had been committed to USC for a very long time, but was also exploring his options while he was committed to USC, has finally officially reopened his recruitment and has decommitted from the Trojans. And according to ESPN and maybe a number of other outlets, I haven't looked at a bunch, he is likely to decide between one of three schools: Colorado, Indiana, and Georgia now in the mix. Previously, Auburn was being talked about as a potential landing spot for Julian Lewis if he were to decommit from USC. Now it's Georgia in the conversation. And I believe the last time I'd seen a lot of movement with this, there was talk that Julian Lewis is wanting to go play for Coach Prime at Colorado. And now that they're rolling, I don't think that's completely unrealistic to think about at this point. Early on in the year, it looked like Colorado might be heading toward another mid-year at best or below average year, whatever you want to refer to it as. But now Colorado, excuse me for itching my eye. I'm sure if you're those of you watching on YouTube, you've noticed me the last couple of minutes keep itching it. I don't know why. It's flaring up the way that it is. But anyway, with Julian Lewis and potentially going to Colorado after what they've done this year, I don't think anybody really expected Colorado to be as good as they are now, competing for a potential spot in the college football playoff if they can win the Big 12. And that's another thing that's interesting too. The Big 12 race is one of the messiest races in college football now that BYU has taken a loss. And I don't know that they're in control of their destiny to make the Big 12 championship game. I'm assuming they can still get in with one loss, but they may end up having to face a surging Colorado team. Man, I don't know if I'm ready for Coach Prime in the playoffs. I mean, it will make for some interesting television. And honestly, I don't know if there would be a more electric head coaching matchup when it just comes to personalities than getting a Curt Cignetti versus Deion Sanders, matchup in the college football playoff in some way, shape, or form. I don't know that I would like it, just because I would hate to lose to Deion Sanders. But hey, it would probably be one of the most, I almost want to say iconic, but we're just thinking Indiana and Colorado being an iconic matchup, but like it will definitely be a clash of personalities, right? So that could be very intense, and maybe that would be something to be interested in seeing. And of course, if it happens, it happens. We'll keep an eye on it. Another thing we're going to be keeping an eye on is if Indiana gets jumped in any way, shape, or form during the college football playoff ranking show tomorrow. And I don't know that they will. I think I would have been worried about that had Tennessee upset Georgia over the weekend. That did not end up happening, of course. And of course, BYU losing as well. So I think you're going to see Indiana stay at that number 5 ranking on Tuesday's reveal. And that can only be a good thing, right? And then at that point, we just all eyes on Saturday at noon against the Buckeyes in Columbus. Anything else you want to hit on before we bring in Mitchell Paige? I know we've been going quite a bit here, and I usually bring in Mitchell Paige by now, but I don't want to say change the format of the show a little bit, but I do think it's kind of good on Mondays to kind of get through all of the reactioning for the most part in the early going before you dive deeper into other things. And that's why this may seem a little bit longer compared to usual. I will say this though, for sure. On the other side, we will react a little bit to a little more of some of the results from college football and really the NFL too. I want to react to a little NFL stuff. And then we'll probably call it from there. Because one thing I'm going to get into right now, the last thing I want to talk about before we bring on Mitchell Paige, is the Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight that led the show on Friday. Believe it or not, if you happen to miss that, decided to dive into that a little bit early. But like I mentioned, I went to some friends on Friday night and went over to a friend's house, I should say, and let's start with the broadcast, shall we? Because the fights, the broadcast was on Netflix. It was their first attempt at putting a live sporting event, as far as I know, on their streaming platform. And it was free to all those who had a Netflix subscription, of course. Wasn't like a pay-per-view extra, as far I don't think it was, at least. And the biggest, it's honestly the disaster was everything you thought it could be when it comes to the broadcast. For those of you who may have watched it, I mean, it was, if you didn't move your, the way you were viewing it to either your phone or your laptop, if you try to just watch it on your TV or like your Fire Stick, Roku, whatever it may be, anybody who did that had issues streaming it. And we missed the entirety of one of the undercard fights because just the TV was having issues buffering. It wasn't a TV problem. Anybody who was doing this was having the issue, and you could tell just by looking at the reaction on Twitter. And it had something to do with like bandwidth or whatever. I don't know exactly what it was, but it doesn't surprise me to see Netflix have this problem, because if you remember, I think this was about a year ago. There's a show that my wife loves called Love is Blind. I think this was the show that this happened on, where they were going to live stream the finale on Netflix. This would have been their first attempt, and it was their first attempt at doing live programming of any sort, and they couldn't even get it off the ground. I think they just pre-recorded it and released it after the fact. And I don't think they had ever tried something in the world of live streaming events since then, until this Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight. And it could have been worse, but it could have been better, of course. And most people, and this is what we ended up having to do, like I mentioned earlier, if we were able to pull up the stream on a phone or a laptop of some sort, it worked then. And we didn't have any issues moving forward. But it's kind of silly that you would have to do that in order to experience the event the way that it was meant to be experienced. And then the fight itself. I mean, I don't really know exactly what I expected. A lot of people came in thinking, oh, I just want to see Mike Tyson beat the crap out of little D-bag Jake Paul. And that was far from what happened. Mike Tyson looked like he was completely, out of his element. And what else would you expect from somebody who is, been long retired from the game for as long as he has, and as old as he is now, going against somebody who is 27 years old and probably in his prime when it comes to his, athletic ability. And Jake Paul, even though it wasn't, it wasn't a fun fight, it wasn't super, aggressive. Like, Jake Paul didn't completely beat down Mike Tyson. He still handily did way better than Mike Tyson could have ever done, right? And both of them came away with millions and millions of dollars, and I'm sure that was that. Even though Mike Tyson, I'm sure, didn't enjoy losing to somebody like Jake Paul, I'm sure he's not complaining about the paycheck that he went home with. So, very underwhelming event. I mean, the best part about it was hanging out with friends. I'm sure many of you, if you decided to consume the event that was Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson, hopefully you did it with a bunch of friends or some family, and maybe sat down and had a drink, whatever it may be. Hopefully that's how you took it in, and maybe just your memories of this experience will be who you were with instead of what you were watching, because the product on the TV was subpar. It was subpar. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and move into Mitchell Paige. He joins us from a different location than usual, and I'll save that I'll let him explain what that is, or maybe I explained it at the beginning. I honestly don't remember what it was. I think I actually do kind of mention where he's at. So the tease won't last very long. So we'll move into that right now. Mitchell Paige, he and I talking a lot about Indiana football and what this week coming up for them means for, the big picture of the season, the program. So let's move into that right now. Joining us now, Mr. Mitchell Paige, but he's not from his usual place of dwelling. He's also not in his vehicle either. He is joining us from the friendly confines of Arizona. I don't know what town you're in or what city you're in, but I do know you're out in that particular West Coast state. Welcome into In Touch with Indiana Sports, my friend.
Yeah, happy to be here. It's nice to have a little bye week. I'm in Scottsdale. I'm playing in a golf tournament this week, so IU schedule lined up for them. lined up for me as well to be able to be out here and not have to miss anything.
I can't really tell what kind of building you're at, but it looks very tranquil, kind of like a little oasis. I don't know why I'm getting that vibe from where you're sitting, but I can kind of tell it's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's my partner for the tournament. It's his birthday tomorrow, so we got a little nicer house. Got a little turf area. We're in Arizona, so there's desert, and there's not gonna be no grass, but little turf area for cornhole or whatever. Got a nice pool, got a hot tub. It's nice.
Living it up, enjoying the bye week in style.
We're trying. We're absolutely trying. I didn't like what happened in the college football world yesterday. I'm going to lead right into it.
Is it because of the Georgia result specifically?
I just think there's a lot of – with Indiana not playing, it's like out of sight, out of mind. You get all these people that think the SEC is so good, even though they just beat each other. They don't play anyone, and they beat up on Mercer every year. But they have this reputation that they've earned over the past couple of years that they're going to be kind of cream of the crop conference. And I don't know, if you're getting beat a bunch of times, it's hard for me to justify putting you above a team that has gotten beat 0 times.
Well, I'll say this. I don't particularly think that Georgia is going to jump Indiana after their win over Tennessee, especially when you consider the fact that Tennessee was already considered one spot lower than Indiana in last week's college football playoff ranking. So it wouldn't surprise me if maybe you see them switch spots potentially, or at least, inch them up a little bit closer. But I don't think any 2-loss team at this point in the season is going to jump an unbeaten team from a Power 4 conference.
Agree. And I don't think it'll happen this week, but because of the things that I just mentioned, the margin for error for Indiana got almost infinitely smaller. I'm kind of starting to believe that Indiana might have to win for the committee to not put 5 or 6 SEC teams in the 12-team playoff. And I don't know why I feel like that. I do. I think the game at least has to be ultra competitive. There's no handle business, lose by 10 and still make it. For whatever reason, that's what I feel in my heart. So you have to, and I don't know why I said that with a little Southern accent, in my heart, but I think that it's Oregon it was such a funny 4 hours because you're watching Oregon and they should have lost. They played terrible. If Wisconsin had a pulse on offense, they go down and at least get a field goal, tie the game, and they just couldn't do it, couldn't get out of their own way. You're feeling like, holy crap, we're going to make the Big Ten championship with ease. And then now you're sitting here, Oregon pulls it out. You got a Georgia win, kind of a dominant win over Tennessee, who people think are pretty good. Finally, Carson Beck throws it to his own team for the first time in 6 weeks. And now you start getting the SEC so good. It just worries me about the perception of a committee that's shown a lot of those biases in the past.
Yeah, and again, the committee does shift around every year. I think there are some that shuffle in out of the committee, and there's some that return and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So you do get some fresh faces and voices, and
For
I
sure.
do think it does help that the Big Ten has been seen, at least when it comes to the top teams of the conference, really the top 4.
The brands.
They do respect all
The
4
brands.
of them, and I'm including
Yeah.
Indiana in all this. I know Indiana's not a brand, but I mean, the Big Ten has the 4 highest ranked teams from any conference. Now, where things get a little bit fishy is the fact that the rest of the conference, if we're being honest, is pretty mid.
They're terrible.
Who's below Indiana when it comes to who's the 5th best team? Is it Illinois? Is it Iowa? Is it
Probably Iowa, and Iowa is up and down. They've had some good games, some bad games. Maybe Wisconsin.
That's true. I mean, Wisconsin, I mean, their quarterback is kind of stinky. At least he played stinky at the end of the game last night. But
Yeah, right.
and I know that's not the quarterback that they've been going with all season long. He's their backup. But
Yeah.
I mean, I had a friend of mine who is a Wisconsin fan, and I can't remember if it was him or if this was somebody on Twitter, but he had mentioned that he thinks that Wisconsin's quarterback would be a good FCS QB. He has no business being a power 4 level quarterback. And maybe you disagree with that. We're not here to, evaluate Wisconsin football.
Yeah.
But are you aware of what would have changed when it comes to the Big Ten race if Oregon would have lost? I mean, I know that there's a scenario where you would have had 11-1 Oregon, 11-1 Penn State, I guess 11-1 Ohio State. And would you have potentially had a 4-way tie at 11-1 if Oregon lost last night?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It just got more interesting. Yeah. I think Oregon kind of has the inside track. I'm not really sure what it really changed when you talk about the actual tiebreakers themselves, but as it stands, Oregon kind of has that spot locked up, and the other 3 teams are kind of battling, right? Indiana's got to go to Ohio State and win to lock that spot up because of the tiebreakers currently. And I just think it added more confusion. Yep. Maybe Indiana was still on the outside looking in if they all were 11-1, but it added more confusion, gives you a little more hope. And I think what the big thing would have been is Oregon may have dropped a little, maybe to like 6, and Indiana moves up to 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And that makes the drop. I believe Indiana's going to go to Ohio State and win, and that's going to fix all of this. Then we don't have to talk about anything. Now we're all of a sudden talking about a first round bye instead of just making it.
And I'm going to say this too, to cut you off for a second.
Yeah.
I think we've got, at least for me, I've gotten to the point to where, and Mitchell, you know that I'm not the kind of person that argues back and forth with people on Twitter. Right. Well, a buddy of mine, so the other, or I guess earlier tonight, before we started recording this, I saw a tweet put up, and it was a tweet that had a video of Kirby Smart basically talking about why the SEC is so good. You may or may not have seen it make its rounds.
It's the classic crap.
Yeah, and so I quote tweeted with that, saying something along the lines of, it'd be nice if the SEC played 9 conference games, something like that. And a buddy of mine who is a Kentucky fan decided to rebuttal. And again, I wasn't even talking about Kentucky. I was just talking about the SEC in general. But seeing his response and basically just whining because his Kentucky team is not good enough to play in a difficult SEC conference. SEC teams love to talk about how mighty the conference is until – and it's not necessarily until they're not doing good, but they love to resort to bitching about not being as successful as they are because they're in a quote-unquote difficult league. And I'm not trying to say that it's not difficult. I'm just tired of that being the same narrative for teams that aren't having the level of success that they want to have.
Yeah, it's unlike really anything else in sports. And I kind of wish that the Big Ten was more like this. It's like we're all allowed to fight each other, but it's like your brother. Like, I'm allowed to beat him up, but as soon as someone else tries to beat him up, then we all come to rescue him, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're talking about any team pick any team, Florida, Georgia, Missouri, whoever it is, they're allowed to fight amongst themselves. But as soon as someone from Indiana says, wait, we have 0 losses, those teams have 2 losses, shouldn't wins count for something? And then it's all about the SEC. And it's the same thing as like your brother on the playground saying something, whatever he says, and then all of his other brothers come and protect him. I wish that the Big Ten was more like that. I think that you have to be, especially as college football continues to evolve, they're going to have to take on some of that mindset of we protect each other, because it's going to be kind of a revolving door as you start to see the conferences get more power. The Big Ten's going to have to keep up with the SEC. The SEC already does that for each other. They've got a lot of power. And I think I'm worried that that's going to be on display.
One thing I would love to see is when we get to this 12-team playoff, no matter how many SEC teams get in or, what position seeding they end up getting, I would love to see all of them just lose out. And that, I think at that point, you can kind of shift the conversation to, the SEC is a good conference, but maybe they're not as unbeatable as they've been in the past with that. That's probably, if you're not an SEC fan, that's probably best case scenario, because without that, you're never going to change that narrative, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a good conference. They've had the best teams in the country however many years. out of however many years. It feels like they've just dominated college football for the last 10 years. But it wasn't that way before that. And it is funny. I do watch those games hoping both teams will lose.
Last thing I want to mention before we wrap this up, because I know that this is a different scenario for this week, as you know where you're at and coming off a bye week.
We're on a bye week. We're going to turn our focus to the Buckeyes. I want to talk a little Buckeyes after that.
And that's what I want to do here. So if Indiana's going to win Saturday, I'm sure there's a number of things that have to go right. But what's the one thing that you want to see from Indiana to have success against Ohio State in the shoe this weekend?
Yeah, I think this is so cliche, but if you're going to compete at the level that I think Indiana is capable of competing and wants to compete at, you're going to have to be good on the offensive and defensive line. Ohio State has struggled, especially offensively, blocking people. Indiana's got one of the most disruptive pass rushes in the country based on pure statistics. You can't argue it. You can't refute it. And they're going to have to cause a lot of havoc. I think Will Howard is Curtis Rourke-esque in the way that I don't think he's the most talented guy. His numbers aren't quite as good, but they're still solid. He controls the game. He's got athletes all over the field, and he doesn't have to go out and win the game in some of the ways that old Ohio State quarterbacks would go out and do, right? So it's a little bit different style of offense, but if you can disrupt a guy like that, I mean, think about what Michigan did to Indiana. Indiana was a better team, so they found a way to win, but when you disrupt the timing, especially when you're as explosive as you are on the outside, those routes take a long time to develop. So if you can create pressure, get them off their timing, and get them on kind of the back foot, that creates a lot of plays for your pass rush. And if you can stay disciplined, which they've done all year in the secondary, you create pressure up front, it creates opportunities in the back. So you're going to have to really control the line of scrimmage, especially on defense. And on offense, you've got to play discipline. Drop the ball a bunch against Michigan, drive killing drops. You're going to have to make those plays. This is a real deal ball team now. And you have to, if you're going to make plays, or if you're going to say, like we're talking about SEC bias, Big Ten, if you're going to talk the talk, this is the time to really walk the walk, because that's a national championship caliber team that sits in Columbus. And if you're going to win a game like that, you got to go punch them right in the face immediately. This isn't going to be a 4-quarter slog like it was against Michigan. You can't play that game when they have that much talent. Not that Indiana doesn't have the same talent, but in their building, game day, big noon kickoff, 110,000 people, you got to get after them early and punch them hard. And that you kind of set the stage.
The pressure's already on Ohio State because they have to win this game.
They lose, they're out the playoff. Probably.
I don't know about out of the playoff, but definitely out of the Big Ten championship.
Out of the Big Ten championship, and probably having to go to somebody. Now, is that a problem? Yes. Who knows? But their kind of aspirations for where they want to go kind of rely on this. And Indiana's just played free all year. The pressure definitely is in their locker room. Love to go out and see them play free. You have 2 weeks to prepare. I'm sure they'll come up with a good plan, and hopefully it starts fast.
One thing that was a little bit alarming at points for Indiana I guess it was a weekend, whenever it was, when they played Michigan, was the offensive line. And of course they had the injury. I can't remember which offensive lineman it was that got hurt, but they tried to break in somebody new, and you really didn't see kind of the growing pains of that until the second half, when Michigan kind of realized that they had the talent advantage at that point, and they were trying to make their comeback and that type of stuff. Do you think that could potentially be another issue against a team that's probably going to have a similar talent level to Michigan?
Yeah, I'm not sure that they have a similar talent level. I think they're good. Michigan's got one of the best pass rushes. They stink literally everywhere else, but their pass rush is elite. They showed it. It's similar to the guys they had last. I mean, these are guys now, and yeah, you're going to have problems. That's just the way it is. When you have that much talent on the other side of the ball, you're going to have problems. Now, do I think Ohio State is as disruptive as those guys? No, but they're going to be close. So, yeah, you're going to have to be very sound. It's going to be loud. pre-snap penalties, when you talk about discipline, can't start 1st and 15, have a 2nd and 8, make it 2nd and 13. You can't have silly, nonsensical penalties. You start doing that, you're playing from behind, and Ohio State loves that game. I'm excited to see it, man. It's going to have to be the most disciplined performance. You don't have to do anything special. You got talent. You've made the plays. You've shown you're capable. But maintaining an elite level of discipline is what separates the best teams in the country versus the worst. You just can't win when you have pre-snap penalties and drop balls and don't maintain gap responsibility on the D-line.
And we'll find out later, I was going to say later this week, but after next weekend, whether or not Indiana truly belongs with the elite of the elite. We've thought so pretty much all year long. I'm sure, Mitchell, it does seem like you had the inkling before that I did. I can absolutely admit that, because I remember you were pulling the FPI predictions on me before I even had a chance to really kind of buy into that. And at that point, I don't think everybody thought it was complete nonsense, but I mean, when it was that early in the season, because I believe it was pretty much after the UCLA win, when those metrics really started to kind of realize what Indiana could potentially have. And I mean, to the FPI's credit, however that formula works, I mean, they've been pretty much right on the money ever since. So, and props to you for, buying into that as quickly as you did. And, again, I can't believe we're here. And again, I sometimes know we talk about this a lot. It's like the pinch me type of moments, like Indiana's really in this position. I'm excited that they're going to be playing a meaningful football game on the road against a blue blood football program with a chance to solidify your college football playoff appearance. You'll do that for sure if you win. And then potentially all but solidify your Big Ten championship game appearance, because you do technically have to take care of Purdue, I would say, to guarantee that. But we'll get there after.
We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah.
You go out
when we get there.
You go out and beat Ohio State in their building. Now things start to really change, and I think it's a possibility, man. I can't wait for next week. It's Ohio State week, 8 week. Let's go.
Will you be there? Will you? I remember you talked before. Will you be in Columbus?
No, I needed a night game.
Okay.
I needed a night game, so I'll still be traveling. I won't be in the air, so I'll be able to watch it on the ground, but I'm not going to be able to make it. It sucks.
Mitchell Paige, I appreciate your time as always. Good luck at the Barstool Classic.
Thank you, sir. We're going to try to go win it. We'll see.
Go win it. And hopefully we'll have 2 good wins to talk about next Monday. Big thanks to Mitchell Paige for taking some time to join us, even though he is out in Arizona getting ready for the Barstool Classic. If I remember right, he did pretty well in that event with his buddy that he is down there with. And I've never been good at golf. And I mean, I like a little mini golf, a little putt every now and again. But I was going to say maybe it's too late for me to learn how to be, good at something like golf. And it probably is in the grand scheme of things. But if I really wanted to, I could probably at least be below average at it, which why would I want to waste my time trying to be below average, right? So if you're a golfer, shout out to you. I know Mitchell enjoys golf. Let's get into a couple of, I want to go through some of the results from over the weekend. And I realize I've already talked a lot about some of the more outstanding college football results. I already mentioned that BYU got bested by Kansas. Oregon's nearly getting upset by Wisconsin. Talked about Tennessee and Georgia a little bit earlier. I didn't mention Arizona State upsetting Kansas State, but I did mention that the Big 12 is becoming pretty nonsensical when it comes to just really how messy their league race is right now. But one result that I do want to mention, that again, you all know that I don't cover the Louisville Cardinals, but I'm very familiar with their program because of where I also work, my day job of sorts here in Louisville. Man, I don't know if any of you all saw the finish in Stanford versus Louisville, but man, a choke job if I've ever seen one. And of course, being Indiana fans, especially those of us who have watched Indiana football over the years, we're used to seeing a result similar to what happened with Stanford and Louisville. Louisville's tied with Stanford with, it was like 4th and 11, and there was just a few seconds left. And so instead of punting away, Louisville decided to take a shot at the end zone. And they were on the opposite team's territory, but not really close enough to kick a field goal. So they go for it on fourth down. They don't really go for the first down. They go for the whole thing. And they could have had it if Tyler Shuck, their quarterback, had thrown it a little more accurately. But they missed the fourth down attempt, and Stanford gets the ball with, I believe it's like 4 or 5 seconds left. It's not a lot of time. And Stanford has just enough time to run a play, try to get out of bounds, and either kick a field goal or take a shot. And they do their play. They barely make it past the line of scrimmage, but they do get out of bounds. But here's the kicker. No pun intended, kind of. But what happened was, in case you didn't see it, after the player went out of bounds, the Louisville player gets into the face of the Stanford player and starts kind of shoving him after the play is over. Well, you know what happens after that, right? The unsportsmanlike conduct penalty flag gets thrown, and that's an extra 15 yards. And I don't remember exactly how long the field goal was at that point, but Louisville shot themselves in the foot, not only right there, but they did it a second time by jumping off sides on special teams to give them an extra 5 yards. So that's 20 yards in penalties. And Stanford kicks the field goal, game-winning field goal, as time expires. And again, it's a very Indiana way to lose that game for the Louisville Cardinals. And I thought that might be why it's worth mentioning a little bit on here. Very glad we haven't had that type of season for the Indiana Hoosiers football program. And that pretty much does it for the major college results. But I do want to get into a little bit what happened in the NFL this weekend, because I did consume a little more NFL this past Sunday than I typically do. I guess we'll just start with shouting out the Colts, because I usually don't get a chance to do that on this show. Usually I'm talking about all the bad things going on with the Indianapolis Colts, but they got it done this weekend. Anthony Richardson back at starting quarterback for the Colts, and he leads them to a 28-27 victory over the Jets on the road. 20 of 30 passing, 272 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, maybe getting benched was good for him, even though it does seem like the Colts still don't really know what they're doing most of the time. It's about as good of a result as you could have hoped for if you are the Colts franchise, or even a fan of the team, right? Because you're 5-6, of course, not anywhere near an ideal record, but if you can change your fortunes as you get, move towards, the back half of the season, maybe the Colts can compete for a wild card spot. I wouldn't bet on it, but maybe this is the beginning of Anthony Richardson kind of growing up a little bit into his role as the starting quarterback of an NFL franchise. What else do we have? We had the Packers-Bears rivalry that ended in dramatic fashion, where the Bears had their game-winning field goal attempt blocked, and the Packers extend their win streak against the Bears to 11. There's some Bears fans that live around here, and I know they were very unhappy about the result there. And it feels like the Bears are just a miserable franchise. They haven't had success in quite some time, and kind of feel bad for them. Don't really have a dog in the fight when it comes to Bears and Packers, but very dramatic way for that game to end. Lions-Jags. Lions, I believe, set a franchise record for themselves, winning 52-6. I believe that was the largest margin of victory ever for them, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know if this has already happened by the time of this recording, but I heard somebody mention earlier today that they wouldn't be surprised, because the Jags are having an off week, if they move on from their head coach. So if this has happened as of the time of this recording, or by the time this is released, my apologies. Maybe it hasn't happened, though. Who knows? What else? Oh, Vikings-Titans. This isn't so much about the result as it is about Nick Westbrook-Akine's 98-yard touchdown reception. And that was, I believe, that's the longest touchdown reception so far this season in the NFL. And, of course, Nick Westbrook-Akine, formerly just Nick Westbrook when he was at Indiana, was a former Hoosier. And I just wanted to shout him out for that terrific play, even though the Titans did fall to the Vikings 23-13. What else do I want to mention here? Steelers took down the Ravens. Didn't watch much of that game, but that's a big loss for the Ravens. Just apparently Lamar Jackson has struggled against the Steelers throughout his career. And haven't followed that specific aspect of it that closely. And then one more result that I want to mention. Actually, there's two. And I'm going to save the one I was about to get into for last. And but the one I'm going to mention here first is what happened last night, Monday Night Football. Chargers do get the win against the Bengals, but the Bengals stormed back in amazing fashion. Is it the best way to put it? And the only reason I care about that is because my fantasy team, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, helped keep me alive tonight. And hopefully with the Texans playing the Cowboys tonight and Nico Collins being back, I just need about 20 points. And that's maybe a lot to ask from somebody who was on an injured reserve for the last several weeks to do. But I wouldn't put it past Nico Collins to have a really good night returning from injury, considering it was only a hamstring. It could have been much worse, of course. But hopefully I can get the fantasy win and stay on top of my league. I'd still be on top if I lost, but I'd be tied with somebody at that point, and I don't want that. So, and then the final game I want to mention, Sunday Night Football, and it's because it's the Bills. Y'all know that my wife, I'm not a fake Bills fan. It's just, it doesn't hit me emotionally the way that it does my wife. And I learned that last night with seeing my wife and my stepsister react the way that they did to Josh Allen's 4th down touchdown run that helped propel the Bills to a 30-21 victory at home against the previously undefeated Chiefs. And what a statement by Buffalo to kind of show that they should be in the conversation to potentially make a run at the Super Bowl. And I, certainly hope that the Bills do just that. So there's a little bit of a rundown of the NFL from the weekend in case you missed any of it. And I need to watch. I need to have more weekends like that where I'm more plugged into the NFL. And because I enjoyed that. I did enjoy that. So I think that's going to wrap it up for us today here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Appreciate you sticking around for episode number 50. And I look forward to the next 50 episodes as well as we move further and further into basketball season. Plenty of stuff to get excited about over the next couple of weeks. And, of course, we're going to follow along the Indiana Hoosiers football team as they, head into the twilight portion of the regular season and potentially make a run at, far into the college football playoff. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But remember to check out everything going on HoosierIllustrated.com. Subscribe on YouTube as well, and leave a comment. We'll go over comments at some point this week, and I'll react to things you have to say, whether it be about things that I've mentioned or things that have happened on the field or on the court, whatever it may be. You can leave a comment on under any of the videos, of course, and I'll read some of those on the air during the next recording or so. So until then, this has been another episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.